Happy 4th of July. It's Independence Day. And I just got a phone call from my brain twin and found out that for the last 2 weeks he hasn't had his independence. He's in the psych ward, and I don't really know the American system very well, but something about a 15-day hold and then 30-day hold possibly after that, and more even, I don't know. So I'm going to go down and visit him next week and also drop off the electric car that he lent me. And I'm just sort of wondering what can be done to start to create some of these medication-free respite centers, because without them, we just get funneled into the mental health system, and he's getting injected with medications, and it's pretty hard to taper off that when one is having people inject things into someone. I had control over my medications and I was able to taper off of them, but if I was being injected and someone's driving me there to get my injection and things like that, or I'm in the hospital getting injected, it's pretty hard to make a self-directed choice to not be on them. So I really don't know what to do, and maybe I can kind of hope that sharing some of this journey I've been through has shown a little bit that there is a need for those sorts of things, because I was able to stay out of the psych ward in January because I had all the wonderful relationships at the clubhouse, and they sort of acted as a one-day temporary respite for me to gather myself enough to go and stay with my family and just sort of medicate myself with extra Seroquel without having to go to the hospital and be re-traumatized by that, and maybe get a doctor that would drug me up on something that I didn't want. But this way I was able to just take extra Seroquel for a week or so and then go about my life. And then I managed to get to California because of that, whereas that crisis happened on something like January 23rd. And if it would have been like the time before, when I was in there for a whole month, I was actually in California by February 15th. So a couple weeks later, I just left for California after getting through that with the temporary one-day respite of the clubhouse, and then being able to just self-direct my own going through and navigating that crisis, and then getting to California. And when I did get to California a month later, I experienced a bit more difficulties, took extra Seroquel again, and then decided I don't want to drug myself up anymore. I want to not be on these. And then I went through the process of moving away from medications with the help of Hearty Nutritionals, and they have been amazingly supportive. And who knows how long I'll be able to stay on micronutrients. I'm hoping indefinitely. I feel so much better. I feel a lot more clear. So I wonder if this journey I've been on, that I've managed to self-direct to crisis events and then sort of be fed up with that way of going about dealing with it and just move away from medications altogether. And now I've been off meds for a month and I feel really good and strong, and hopefully it continues. But even if it doesn't, it shows what is possible for a person even without support of a respite center. And I know there's actually a respite center in Winnipeg in Canada. I don't know if it's medication free or if it's just a peer respite or what. I'm just wondering when I go back if I'll be able to be in dialogue with the clubhouse I'm a member of, because those are the people that I have the strongest relationships with, and maybe we'll be able to help unfold some of these ideas or support some of them or move towards creating some of them as part of the clubhouse or as some kind of something related to the clubhouse, or at least direct me to set up something that maybe is completely peer run, that could be set up in a way that peers decide without reference to the mental health system. So I don't know if this self-dialogue will show that journey or not, but I feel like I need to at least try. And I did say in a recent video that I feel like the dream center that I was told to create by this man that I met who was basically homeless, he told me to create a dream center to help people get off drugs and find meaningful work and restore their dignity. And I really feel that it was almost like a premonition situation, because I do want to create that, but for people who are on pharmaceutical drugs and for people who are on other drugs who perhaps just never subscribe to the pharmaceutical drug system. It's just exchanging one thing for another. So if someone won't take their pharmaceutical meds, they often don't get any supports. They end up homeless on the streets, taking street drugs. But I don't think pharmaceutical drugs are any better or worse. They're just I don't even know what to say right now, but anyways, what I'm trying to say is I wonder if I'll be able to continue and use some of this energy to see if I can get something started for people to be able to kind of do the process that I've managed to do on my own by getting myself to California and kind of having respite here, even though where I've been, it's not a respite center, but it's still quiet and full of nature and there's people around, so it's social. So it has all those aspects that are supportive of that without actually being that. So I just wonder who might be drawn to help co-create this, because if somebody can move through this and be strong, not by like being emotionally strong or some kind of, I'm not trying to say that, but just be able to create something as a result of moving through everything. And then hopefully one day people won't even have to go through all of this trauma from the system. It just creates so much further psychological injury, really, to somebody who's already way too overburdened. And yeah, I just don't know. I wonder what role I'll be able to play in bringing something about. I really don't know. I've said before, I don't know if I could actually work at a respite myself at this point, but I would still like to be able to provide perspective to maybe show that it's necessary. And maybe through all this talking I've done with myself, it shows that a bit, because it shows that if someone can avoid the mental health system through two crises, then one is better off. Because over a year ago in April, when I was in the hospital, that nearly did me in. And just over a year later, I'm in California and doing really well. And there was probably 2 times I could have gone back to the hospital and I didn't. And I'm better off for it. But at the same time, people need a supportive and caring place to go. That's not going to immediately just slap a label on them and pump them full of drugs. And yeah, I just don't know how to bring that about except for asking people to see the necessity and ask for it and advocate for it to be funded, and advocating for people who might be drawn to supporting people through extreme states to get some training and do that. So I'm taking a course in a week or 2, and I'm hoping that will help me a little bit, and then I have some notes on business and that Superhuman audio I listened to by Wilber, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about that to get my nervous system a bit inspired, because it's one thing to talk about moving into one's superhumanity. Meanwhile, one of one's best friends is in a place where they've lost their humanity and it's been taken away, and I know this person has just as much potential as I do, if not more, and we all have our own unique potentials that we can unfold and create, and in a way I have to be somewhat superhuman in order to create what I would like to create, for other people to move away from the medications and then be able to heal and move into their superhumanity. So I want to talk to the clubhouse when I get home and just say, look what happened when you supported me for one day. They've supported me many, many days, but I'm just saying on this particular instance where I was in major distress, and those relationships and them being there for me kept me away from the psych ward. And then I was able to go to California a couple weeks later because of that. That saved me so much suffering. It saved the cost that it would cost for me to spend 10 to 30 days in a psych ward, etc., etc. And then I went to California and I'm not receiving disability or anything like that. So how much of a, if all those savings could be multiplied by however many people, that could more than pay for a respite center. So it actually saves money to be able to keep people away from that, because unfortunately a lot of times it makes people worse and then justifies needing more and more treatment that is not necessary. So when I went to the hospital in April of 2016, they basically made me way worse. And I was in there for 30 days, and then the next year when I wasn't doing well in January of this year, I didn't go to the hospital for a single day, and less than 30 days later, I was in another country. So it's very, very obvious differences that are not just financial to the system or suffering for me, but I was able to go somewhere and move towards thriving, not taking another huge dive. So I wonder if that kind of conversation will be welcome, or if they'll be able to be in dialogue about some of this. I wonder if they'll have time to talk to me. And interestingly enough, when I was in the psych ward last year and it was really bad, somebody from the clubhouse came to visit me, and that energy of that interaction actually made it so I could keep going. So it was again the clubhouse and those relationships that saved me. And that's why I've actually been thinking that respite should be part of the clubhouse, because that's where all of our relationships are oftentimes if we're connected to the clubhouse. So a person's really connected to the clubhouse, they have these great relationships, then they're thrown into this sterile, inhumane, mechanical, robotic system. And it's kind of not good. So I'm wondering if making it part of the clubhouse, basically just having an area for people to have respite, and then having specifically trained workers who can be with people in extreme states and dialogue and things, and then the person still has access to the clubhouse if the other building is nearby. So yeah, I won't make this video too long. For some reason, the videos are taking longer to upload. So shorter videos, and also I have a lot of extrapolations to talk about, but I feel like I will get to those, and I need to really almost work on a little bit of a proposal or something, or wonder about the conversations that might be powerful to have when I get back. We'll see. I'm sending some energy to my friend in the psych ward. Do you worry that you're not liked? How long till you break? You're happy 'cause you smile, but how much can you fake? An ordinary boy, an ordinary name, but ordinary's just not good enough today. Alone, 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 alone. I'm thinking why, yeah. Superman's dead, yeah. Is it in my head, yeah. We'll just laugh instead. I worry about the weather like hi. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Superhuman podcast I listened to by Ken Wilber, which was an introduction to his 10-week course that I'm not going to take at this time, partly because I don't have $1,000 and I'm just sort of unfolding my own capacities, and that's what I've been doing for the last year. So what really resonated with me about his podcast was that a lot of it is what I've been doing for the last year. By talking to myself in self-dialogue, I've unfolded a lot of my capacities. The capacity to stay out of the psych ward while having a crisis, the capacity to go to California for 5 months, the capacity to taper off medications and feel clear, the capacity to talk to myself every other day on average for a year and say a lot of new things and discover a lot of new things. And like Krishnamurti says, it's discovering that's important and then dropping it, not trying to actually discover something and hang on to it. So I feel that's actually the process that helps one unfold one's capacity. So I'm wondering about if I'll be able to unfold the capacity of being able to communicate this to people in a way that they can hear and communicate it to the right people and with the fullest intention of wanting to be of service to other people because of how I've been able to unfold my capacities. And maybe just sharing this process will help people unfold their own capacities, which might actually eliminate some of the need for respite. Like, for example, if I never need respite because I just talk to myself nearly every day, well, then that might be something that some people might be able to do for themselves. I don't know. That's not what I was going to go into, but Ken Wilber's podcast talked about how we have to awaken our own capacities. They're not there. We don't even know what they are until we awaken them. And I feel like that's what I've been doing. And I'm actually pioneering awakening my capacities in my own way because I'm not depending on others to do it for me or tell me how to do it. I've just been talking with myself and having dialogue with myself, and that has actually, I feel, produced the right resonance in my nervous system to be able to then do what I say, I feel, or I discover. And so the discovering actually gives the nervous system the strength to also do what it needs to do in daily life. So I talk on video, but I also have a daily life that I'm doing stuff as well. And I'm finding that the talking to myself is helping me. And they'll say, oh, if you have a goal, tell a friend, tell your friends and family, and that'll make it easier to do. Well, if one is always making discoveries for oneself and talking to oneself about it, it's sort of like telling a friend. It's like telling your best friend, which is your own nervous system. That's your best friend. That's what's going to allow us to move towards unfolding our capacities and our gifts, is really by unfolding them in our nervous system. And the power of the human voice, it's one of the biggest powers in the universe. And when we're able to use it to awaken our own capacities, not just by looking around and reading what's online to do, but actually discover it for oneself and give voice to that, it really strengthens the nervous system. That's what I've found. So I wonder if I even need this superhuman capacity course. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. But I'm just going along with my own discoveries for now, because as I do this step by step, it's like a very small increment of strength increase in the nervous system, instead of being where I am now and then reading stuff that is so far off from where I might be at right now. It's sort of like trying to lift a 300-pound bench press or something when one's just getting started. So I think that if we don't make our own discoveries, going along with what other people discover can almost mess up the process in a way. And I feel like we need to transcend fear of discovering these capacities, because if we're afraid and fear gets interwoven in the discoveries, then the mental health system is right there to help us figure that out. And it's not often a good result. And one thing the webinar did teach me in a way is that everybody has a contribution, even if it's partial. So the mental health system has a contribution, but it's partial, so there's something beyond it for sure. So maybe there's a time and a place for it for a lot of people, but there's got to be something else for people to be able to move out into, and also something like a respite where people can choose to have a less invasive alternative if they don't really need the psych ward. And we don't even know which people need the psych ward, because right now that's all there is. So if people really need help, that's where they go. So the mental health system isn't bad, it's partial. Luckily, the part that I experienced the most was actually really awesome. And I don't even think of it as the mental health system at all. It's just a wonderful community of people under the guise of mental health. And those are the people that I care about the most in this world, besides my family. So yeah, I really don't like what the system part of it, the real mechanical, robotic, unthinking part of it is doing to people who are so wonderful and being nourished by, say, the clubhouse system or something like that. So I wonder if we can develop beyond it and not fight it. So can something be developed beyond it, like a respite? Not actually trying to fight to make the structure of the system better, but just make something better that people can develop into or utilize instead, and not be developed into a chronic, lifelong mental patient. And it's really a lot of work to avoid being turned into that lifelong chronic mental patient and the trajectory that that creates. And I've worked really hard to avoid that. And at one point in a video, I showed a side-by-side of what I looked like when I first got out of the hospital the very first time 6 years ago. And had I still been on that trajectory, I don't even know. I wouldn't be alive, I know that. So I wouldn't have been able to keep going like that for much longer. And I didn't. I went back to the hospital and changed medications. But I think that that initial insult to my nervous system from those initial medications made everything else afterwards even more seemingly necessary. But how necessary was it? I just don't think I responded well to those long-term antipsychotics. I know I didn't. And anyways, I won't go into that, but I feel like there's something beyond, and we can develop that. And Ken Wilber uses the word integral a lot, and I wonder if there could be such a thing as integral mental health. And I wonder if some of us if we're able to move into our superhumanity and unfold some of our gifts if we can then utilize some of the energy that we have access to help others to do the same somehow. And so he calls it Superhuman Operating System, and I kind of like that terminology. And I think he talked about how if we just listen to his 10-week course or something, it's psychoactive. And I really like that idea of just listening to something, how it's psychoactive. It is. Anything we listen to is psychoactive. Even when I talk so much about epimemetics and things, those are all psychoactive. And when I talked about how words that we repeat in our head are actually language viruses, they're having a psychoactive effect. And then we need psychoactive substances to slow down our thoughts or do all these things. But really the initial psychoactive substance is words and thoughts and things like that. So I wonder if my self-dialogue is somewhat psychoactive. It is, of course. If any word is psychoactive in a way, then all of these words are psychoactive, and I like that. And if it is psychoactive, I just wonder if it will move some people to create their own superhumanity. And I'm talking about my superhumanity even though I've just been off meds for 1 month. But I'm sort of back in that place before I was ever labeled, of being acquainted with that process before it was ever pathologized, and how it did feel like awakening of superhuman capacities, and just looking back at that original experience and that blueprint to wonder what some of those capacities were. And I can actually think back to that time and sort of map out, oh, what was I moving towards? What wasn't good for me? What was bad? Blah, blah, blah. And actually kind of figure it out again from the original blueprint. Not from all this intermediary stuff that happened in between by being medicated. And I really feel we need some of us to be superhumans and then use that to develop something new. Not just use our powers to fight the system, but just to really develop new things. And unfortunately, then we end up having to beg for funding from people. But I feel like if some of us as superhumans were able to create something like businesses or put our ideas together and really create a pool of ideas and then collectively work on it. And that's why I kind of like the idea of the Pure Potential Project. It's like, just put all your ideas in a pool and let's put our brains and our hearts and our souls together and see what we can create to actually create some wealth, to then actually create a respite center instead of trying to beg for funding. We need to create that funding ourselves and then heal our friends. But that's difficult because perhaps maybe not enough of us are healed to have enough of us who are sort of the business and idea-minded people. I know I'm not. I'm sort of an idea person. I'm starting to do this online course on social enterprises, and it talked a little bit about having a this person and a that person and a that person. I'm definitely the idea person. I don't know how good I am at carrying things out, maybe because I'm having so many ideas that the carrying out is just talking about my ideas and insights and things. So it doesn't really leave much time for the rest of it. So having other people with different capacities would be really helpful, because I feel like when one goes through map consciousness or gets acquainted with their superhumanity, they're like a puzzle piece and they need other superhumans to really maximize their capacities and potentials, because superhumanity is not an egoic consciousness. So there's no me success separate from everyone else. It actually is interdependent. So we actually have to find our puzzle pieces, our brain homologs or our brain twins and our brain triplets and quadruplets and quintuplets and blah blah blah, in order to really do this. Because I feel like the new superhuman is actually humans really thinking and working together. And one of the benefits from going through some of these experiences is that I notice when I learn about people who are advocating for change or trying to create something else, they very often think exactly like I do. Yet I've never met them. We've had similar experiences and we come to the same realizations and insights of what needs to happen. So seeing that we have the same vision of what needs to happen we can really work together to create it. It's not like we have to like convince people. We put our energy, if we're working on this type of thing, we put our energy towards convincing the system. But really, if we put our energy towards supporting each other to really co-create and maybe create some businesses or something, then we could actually have a lot of funding and really maybe create funds to help people create more of these respites who are able to do that in different areas. So I think I talked before about having like a pool of insights and things and just putting them together, because they're downloads from the universe. They're not downloads for our ego. They're downloads from the universe to sort of grab out of the quantum hologram and record and share with each other, because they're new memes, they're new thoughts in a way. They're thoughts we didn't think. They're thoughts the universe thunk through us. So that sounds really profound. What are the thoughts that the universe thunk through you? And share them, and we'll probably have this big pool, and we can sort of harvest the ones that are really actionable and see which ones really overlap. So if I share 100 universal thunked thoughts, and I don't know if I said 100 or 1,000, but 1,000, and someone shares 1,000, and another person shares 1,000, and 1,000, and 1,000, and then we throw that in a program, and we see which ones are the most often used, then we can actually see what the universe is trying to tell us by working together on this. Not like, oh, this was my profound thought, and this was my profound thought about my life. It has nothing to do with our personal lives. It's a new pool of thinking and thoughts from the universe for us to then pass along to each other, so we start seeing in different ways. And we who go through these experiences of the mental health system have to do this together to create like a collective epimemetic and epigesturetic matrix of context that we can then move in, and it's something new, and we don't have to refer to the system at all, and then we can just move in creating that. So I think that's important. I sort of want to have dialogue with others, and I had a really good dialogue with someone the other day, and maybe just sort of having dialogue with people and posting the dialogues, so then people can read them and see what is happening in dialogue, and also posting and sharing insights. So there's Twitter for like, what's happening, or what are you doing? Well, what did you download from the universe today? What just arose in your brain without your conscious effort, without your will, without your desire? It was just there. You just had an epiphany. People with this type of consciousness have eureka and epiphany moments like 100 times a day. And I feel like we're meant to share that in order to get some of that circulating, to just change our brains from this personal ego. I have my own personal thoughts, which are just from the collective pool that we've shared between each other, to really understanding that we're thinking with the universe and together and sharing that together, and that our minds aren't separate, they're not personal, and yet we keep them personal, so we create our personal little lives, and that creates all this havoc. So anyways, Ken Wilber says, be a whole human, and that will change every activity that you get engaged with. And I also realized too, can we change autocorrect? So sometimes I've noticed with autocorrect that it changes it to something kind of negative. Like say, I don't even know an example, but I'm typing something and it corrects it, and what it corrects it to is sort of like the most common way of using that, or the most common autocorrection based on that mistake. So I'm wondering if we can almost level up autocorrect, so the correction actually goes to like the most positive thing, because that's the thing people are most often typing. So I'll just make up an example, and it's not exactly right, but if somebody was typing awful and they spelt it wrong, and then it converted it to awful with the right spelling. Well, imagine if somebody was typing awful and they spelt it wrong, but it corrected it to full of awe. And that's not quite right, because it would never correct to that, but it's just an example of it might correct to the more positive thing. And I'm not being clear with that, and I'm not clear with that exactly, but there was some, and I'll try and find some examples where it's like, and it's not even autocorrect, it's when you're typing and it picks the next word for you in the sentence. And sometimes it's like a negative connotation. Like that's what people are typing most often with those first word combinations in front of it. And I think he also mentioned Kant, and Kant said, when anybody suffers, I suffer. And this happens in map consciousness. It's part of like the law of being in map consciousness. We really feel things. And Ken Wilber also said a superhuman practice changes all of humanity. So this is where I'm like, work on my superhumanity or work on helping humanity. And I don't know if there's really any difference per se, or if I feel that just talking to myself for this year will change the conversations I have when I go back home, and I'll have a sense of what I want to create when I'm there and who I can create it with. So we'll see. And actually, I could go eat pie right now, so I don't know if I'll make another video today, maybe, but for now, I'm gonna go eat some pie. It's fresh made. So goodbye. I'm gonna eat pie. And I thought of a funny word, transformation. Instead of pioneer, pie in here. So, pie in here. If you ever want to read something written by somebody who has 100% the opposites of my views, read natashatracy.com. Her articles are just unbelievably pathologizing. And yeah, for example, there are really 3 reasons mental illness patients are non-compliant. 1, the medication isn't working and their illness convinces them to go off their medication. The medication isn't working, but the side effects are intolerable. Their medication is working, they're experiencing wellness, and so they think they no longer need their medication. Blech. Anyways, ugh. And she's actually a person who receives services. She has a mental illness and blogs about all this stuff. And she calls people the patient, the patient, the patient. Ooh. I'm thinking, yeah, Superman's dead, yeah, is it in my head, yeah, we'll just laugh instead, worry about the weather, doesn't anybody ever know? Doesn't anybody ever know? Doesn't anybody ever know that the world's a subway, that the world's a subway. And Sarah thinks she's died here once before. She's crazy. A pop-up book of flowers from Grateful are driving her insane, and no one knows why she's sad tonight. No one can help her find crying. She couldn't afford the view. Crying. These automatic flowers won't do. These automatic flowers won't do. Do 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 do. Another brick, another window frames confusion. Her garden blooms, but Sarah can't see straight. She's drinking herself blind, and no one knows why she's sad tonight. No one can help her find crying. She couldn't afford the view. Crying. These automatic flowers won't do. These automatic flowers won't do. Today, I'm realizing my limitations as a supporter. My friend is in the psych ward, and I was trying to find housing options, and I sort of found like a treatment center, and that's not what they're looking for at all. And I don't really know the American system, so here I am trying to be helpful, but really I could even be damaging our relationship. And then I also said something about the hearty nutritionals, and if they can get out of the hospital, maybe they can get off those meds and on the hearty nutritionals, and they're not really interested in that. They're just interested in getting out and not being on the meds and going about life, and that's perfectly self-directed and reasonable. So I'm not sure how to support people without sort of projecting my own experiences and bits into that person's life. So yeah, I guess I'm just not set up to help people in crisis, and yeah, I'm not set up for that. I don't know how, and yet I don't know what to do. And so I guess it's sort of showing me that just continuing to talk to myself is one thing I can do for myself, and then maybe share it, and then people can grab the bits that they want, if they want, just from me sharing my experience, and not me saying, oh, try this. It's just, this is my experience. End of sentence. Not really recommending anything. Everyone's different, and everyone resonates with different things. And if I were able, I would just set up this wonderful, magical paradise for people to just be and heal and be creative and move towards thriving. But I don't have that. So just trying to help people when I'm really not able to sucks. It doesn't feel good. So I guess just being a friend, and yeah. So I'm just going to keep talking to myself, yet hopefully I'll be able to see my friend next week and see what happens. For me, I find it helpful to think that I have a nutrient dependency, and even go as far as saying that my brain needs more nutrients because it's processing a lot of information, it's processing the past, it's processing a lot of different dimensions. So I take the micronutrients, I find it helpful, but some people might feel like they don't need meds, they don't need micronutrients, and that's totally legitimate. So yeah, I'm not trying to say micronutrients are for everyone, they're not, but I feel like they are helping me, and also helping me to see day by day my limitations of what I'm able to do. And I end up just talking to myself because that's something I'm able to do. And even just trying to help a good friend is showing me that I really can't help anybody. And just still moving with my life. And maybe one day I will have some space for people, or there will be some space for people to really go and figure things out for themselves. And I've talked about that myself, how we really want to figure things out for ourselves. So to have anyone say, take this, even if it is something that might be helpful, isn't helpful. So that's part of what I would want to design, is a really great resource center that's creative that people can discover resources for themselves, and nobody's saying do this or do that. And that's how the clubhouse system is set up, at least the clubhouse I go to. Nobody says, oh, I think you should do this. It's just a great place, and there's resources, and people start to participate in the ways that they want. So yeah, it's just beyond my setup right now, though it's actually part of the relational matrix that I would wish to embody at some point. Or talk to the clubhouse and say, people need this type of rest without meds if they don't want the meds, or somewhere to go. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm just really feeling a little bit mad at myself that I sort of was like, oh, I found this place and I found this place, and what about this? And this friend of mine was very helpful to me when I was in the psych ward last April for 30 days, and they called me nearly every day and never said, oh, you should try this, you should do this, I found this for you. Just listened. So I've talked to myself about how I don't make a very good supporter. Maybe I just make a good researcher of my own experience, and sharing that one day might help some people, or just being whoever I am because of this self-dialogue process might help people. But at the same time, I am who I am, and I've been doing self-dialogue for a year, and then I reach out to support a friend, and I'm not supporting that friend in a way that they find supportive. So I don't know how to do that. I'm not good at that. And I know lots of people who are really good at that, and it really helped me just by listening. And I'm good at talking. I don't know how good I am at listening to other people. Maybe it's because I feel like I know a lot and people should listen to me or something. I don't know, or I have no idea what I'm thinking, but I don't really have that warm, receptive energy that a lot of people just have naturally without even trying. And that's why I don't think I'm actually right to support people through this. Maybe I'm not right to support anyone through anything related to mental health at all, because I have too much knowledge of what could be good or bad, and the tendency to want to give some sort of advice will naturally be there. So maybe after I get home, I might have a few conversations and realize that I'm not even meant to really be involved in mental health further, in even having dialogues about what might be created for people, because I just might come across the wrong way and then sort of destroy the relationships I have that are wonderful, trying to accomplish something. It's like having a motive all of a sudden instead of just being. So I wonder about that. Yet at the same time, my consciousness feels like it's in discontent and revolt and wants to do something. And then when it does do something, it's like, oh, why did I do that? So I don't know. Maybe just going about my days and talking to myself is all I can do. So I will keep going with that for sure. And last night a friend read my magic cards, and it was an animal power deck of some kind. And interestingly enough, it was a 4-card spread about energies around a project that I want to create. And all the cards I picked were actually project-related cards. And I took a picture of the book to remember what each card said, because it actually was quite profound. The first card I drew was the hummingbird, and I'll show a picture of the spread here, but I talked in a recent video of how I said that my new power animal, or my power animal, is the hummingbird. And the first card I drew was the hummingbird. and it was upside down, and I'm not going to say all this right, but the hummingbird was upside down, and the hummingbird card is about joy. And I've talked a lot about how I've sort of lost my joy, and the first card in the spread is to do with the seed of your idea and the animal medicine related to that. So it talks about going into one's sorrow, and so I feel like I really need to go into my sorrow to bring out the joy. So maybe not pretending to be joyous too soon, or I don't know, I'm not really sure what that card means, but it's related to the seed of my idea. So it almost seems like it could be this really joyful hummingbird thing, but there's something there because the card was upside down. And there are definitely things there, and I think it's related to how I feel like I don't have a right to even help other people because of the way my life has gone. So maybe just continuing self-dialogue with myself and not really trying to help others is the way, instead of presenting it in this businessy help other people thing. I'm thinking that the best business idea in a way is just to have it as a research type company, and that way it's some kind of business. So then if something is created from sharing this self-dialogue, then there's sort of a business structure that can hold that to some extent. But I don't even know what that looks like, and really the response would actually generate the business, not me trying to create a business, because I don't really have the skills to do that. And I could try and create one around, oh, everyone should take hearty nutritionals and do this, that, and that's my prescription for everyone. But that's not really good. Whereas if I just sort of share, then maybe people might say, oh, I want to collaborate on this part, I want to collaborate on that part. And that will be the sign of what to do, not what I think I should do. Because I've just been talking to myself for all this time. And then if one day I share that, whatever the response is will sort of determine what is created from the sharing, not me thinking what it is. I put ideas out there, and I'll probably continue to do so somewhat. But maybe people say, oh, that's a really stupid idea, and oh, this is a good idea, and I can help you with that. Or people can just take any ideas. I don't really care about that at all. So, yeah, I'm just keeping the dialogue on myself and not putting it on other people. And I've actually felt the best in my life when I'm not trying to help people. I'm actually just putting the most energy towards helping myself. Like when I was doing 100% raw food, and people at the checkout would say, whoa, what's with all the veggies? And then I'd explain what I was doing, and then that might have some kind of impact on people, but not by actually saying to people, oh, you should do this. So the discovery comes when somebody asks a question about what one is doing. So even going home, maybe I'll never say that, oh, I came off medications and this is how I did it. But maybe if somebody actually asks, like, why are you doing this or blah, 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 then I'll share. So waiting for the invite to share instead of actually putting things out there. And then the next card was the Badger card, and it was right side up, and it was about the group project and who will need to do what, and sort of how different energies are required to come together to make it happen. And it's the Badger card, which is pretty much being quite aggressive to get things done. So it was saying, basically, I'm going to have to kind of badger people and not give up and be relentless. So can I be relentlessly ridiculous? So I just said, oh, maybe I should just give up and talk to myself. But at the same time, this card is saying, just keep going, just don't give up. So I don't think I will give up on trying to create something, but I'll just have to kind of get used to being a bit of a badger. And it was just really interesting that that card was in that position, because it was all about just keep going, be relentless, be sort of aggressive in a way. And the next card was actually upside down dog, and that's not a yoga position, it's a card in the deck. The dog was upside down, and this card was related to, am I doing this project to serve myself or to serve other people? And I don't know if there's really a difference, but it said if it's just serving the self, it'll definitely backfire. And then the dog card is related to loyalty. So the dog interpretation, the card being upside down, is really interesting. It says something about becoming critical or mean due to the company that I keep. And if I feel critical or mean, it's actually the company that I've kept in terms of the mental health system elements that I really am angry with and have not enjoyed whatsoever. So I see that in what the card is saying. And interestingly enough, it says the reversal of this card means it's time to stop cowering with fear and tackle my adversaries with confidence. So it's interesting because this card position is about, is this for myself or is this for others? And this card in particular seems to be saying, if I'm cowering with fear, then I'm just keeping it for myself. And it says it's time to stop doing that, and the time will be soon to stop doing that for sure. And it says that these adversaries are actually thought forms in my mind that tell me I'm not worthy of loyalty. So this really resonates with me. Not really the word loyalty, that just sounds too attached or something, but just really, I fear that the things that I would want to share, I have a great community in mental health, and it might make people disloyal to me or sort of oust me from the community because of my views. Yet they're views that at the same time the card is saying that I need to tackle these adversaries. And it says, reclaim the power of loyalty to self and self-truths. Become like dog, your own best friend. And it's so interesting because I just said in the videos that I made yesterday, before I did this medicine card spread, just hours before, I said, my own nervous system is my best friend. And then that very languaging showed up in this card, and it's about being loyal to oneself and being one's own best friend. And part of that is tackling these adversaries and not fearing this disloyalty. I don't really like that word, that connotation, but yeah. And just so you know, to give full credit, these are called medicine cards by Jamie Sams and David Carson, and they can be purchased on Amazon. It says the discovery of power through the ways of animals. And then the last card was the wolf, face up, right side up. And so the card in the last position is really interesting. It's likely to tell me if the Great Spirit has walked with me, alongside me, hand in hand, on this group project. And it says, but as every medicine person will tell you, matter follows vision and spirit. It is the law. This card is the place of manifestation. I just love how it says that matter follows vision. And I've talked so much about how map consciousness is a visionary state, and it's like a blueprint, and yeah, the matter of my life has followed this vision all along, and it still goes, and that vision needs to be created in some way. And all this that I talk about is about creating this vision, really. This Pure Potential project is about creating this vision, but it's not something I can create by myself. And this was fascinating too, because it says the wolf is the pathfinder, the forerunner of new ideas who returns to the clan to teach and share medicine. As humans, we also have an ability to be part of society and yet still embody our individual dreams and ideas. And that's definitely what I would like to do, and the same kind of language that I use myself. And it talks about how Native American peoples adopt wolf people as the clan of teachers. So there's this theme of teaching. And so I wonder, well, am I supposed to share this? Well, this card is saying, yeah, and the dog card upside down is saying, stop being afraid and just face things and share. The senses of wolf are very keen, and the moon is its power ally. The moon is the symbol for psychic energy, or the unconscious that holds the secrets of knowledge and wisdom. Baying at the moon may be an indication of wolf's desire to connect with new ideas which are just below the surface of consciousness. Wolf medicine empowers the teacher within all of us to come forth and aid the children of Earth in understanding the great mystery of life. And that resonates with me 100%. That's kind of a very esoteric way of putting all of what I've been saying, but it's sort of, I would like to help children to not go through what I've gone through. And so if I'm able to teach in some way, I like the word share better, but this wolf card is called the teacher card. And I just find it interesting that it's basically saying share and teach in order to have the fruits of this manifestation or what have you. If you have drawn Wolf's card, you may be able to share your personal medicine with others. And that's why I've been talking to myself all this time. I framed it as talking to myself, just to myself for myself, but also with an awareness that at some point I might share it. And this card is saying, I drew the wolf card, so maybe I can share my personal medicine with others. And my self-dialogue is my personal medicine. And it's the medicine that I've used in order to taper off of pharmaceutical medications. Your intuitive side may also have an answer or teaching for your personal use at this time. As you feel wolf coming alive within you, you may wish to share your knowledge by writing or lecturing on information that will help others better understand their uniqueness or path. It is in the sharing of great truths that the consciousness of humanity will attain new heights. Wolf could also be telling you to seek out lonely places that will allow you to see your teacher within. And it's interesting because I feel like by sharing new insights, perhaps humanity can see things a little bit different when it comes to altered states of consciousness. And then it also says seek out lonely places. Well, I've been basically alone in California for going on 5 months. So that's something I've already done. It says you may find the true you. Look for teachings no matter where you are. Wolf would not come to you unless you requested the appearance of the tribe's greatest teacher. I just shared that for the purpose of how much that card resonates with all that I've been doing for this whole year. And it's pretty crazy that that got drawn. So I hope I'm not infringing any copyrights. I'm not intending to. What I'm actually intending to do is say these cards are kind of magical medicine cards. And my 2 other friends drew totally different cards that resonated with them. And my cards were exactly the cards I needed. If I would have had the cards my friends drew, it wouldn't have resonated with me at all. So it was just so fascinating how right on these cards were. And so it provided a lot of information. So I actually really like these cards. And hopefully, if reading that bit was not so nice, it is nice to be like, wow, these things are awesome. They're really cool. And yeah, that was really powerful for me to read. Yes, share. Yes, teach. I don't really love the word teach. I don't love the word loyalty. But it's more like fearing disconnection, and as a result of sharing and being too afraid to share, and where's the joy? So I still feel like I do need to connect with joy before sharing this. I feel like, oh, I need to create this and create that, but really I perhaps need to create my own joy first, because if I don't have a joyful spirit, then I won't be able to share this in a joyful way. And everyone wants some level of happiness and joy. So if after all this talk I just feel jaded and angry, then I don't know if any purpose has really been achieved. So I think that's actually good to remember, is move towards joy, because the hummingbird is the joy card. And at points in my life, I have had a lot of joy, and just having that joy actually had the greatest effect on others and myself. And being really healthy brought me a lot of joy, and then I wanted to be off medications to be more healthy. So now that I'm there, I thought it would make me sort of joyful to be off the meds, and I am. So I could use that energy to just work in mental health and try and help people, or I could just really create and radiate joy. And the thing is that if one actually thinks, oh, that's selfish to just create one's own joy, it's not really, because if one looks at Dr. David Hawkins' calibrated scale of consciousness, the level of joy is actually above the level of reason and above the level of love, I think. I'd have to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure after love is joy. So joy is a more powerful state of consciousness, and just by being in a more powerful state of consciousness, that consciousness does a lot without one ever having to try to do anything in particular. So yeah, I think having a joyful nervous system is more powerful than having like a logical, reasonable one that's really trying to do all this stuff, because people don't like people who are trying to do too much. It rubs them the wrong way. So I think just being joyful does a lot more. So yeah, I keep going back and forth pretty much every day, like focus on creating something or just go into being really joyful. And actually, when I was at the parade yesterday, I was wearing a fairy costume, and I was on my rollerblades with a little magic wand and just sort of tapping kids on the head with the wand, and they felt really good. And then people later on were like honking as I was skating back to my car, and just really joyful and waving, and I think stuff like that does a lot more. So I actually was thinking I should get a costume when I go home and just skate around and be joyful and just use that joy to create something and not really try to do so much. And the other stuff may happen in time. Like the stuff that I want to create in terms of a respite and a peer-run organization and some kind of peer potential project where people can really thrive and create the life they want and create something great for humanity at the same time. That's going to take some time to unfold. And I remember when I was in my first state of map consciousness, I thought it all had to happen yesterday. And that's actually one of the downfalls, is not having the patience with the visions and the ideas, trying to make them happen. And if I go back to what these medicine cards said, it actually says matter follows vision. So really talking to myself about the visions is just sort of to keep the resonance and the energy of the visions going, but not necessarily trying to volitionally do something to create it, because that actually makes it an action of the ego. Like, I can do something. I really can't. I can only do something if the consciousness of other people responds in a certain way. Other people might want to participate in sharing their visions, and maybe not necessarily creating them, but just sharing them, because when we're really connecting based on our visions, then the matter will follow. The action of consciousness on matter, on the matter of people's brains, and we'll start cooperating on something way bigger than ourselves. And what I really envision is something that might not happen in my lifetime. So to try to think that I can do it is kind of silly, but I can definitely move towards having a really joyful nervous system. That's something that I can do. And then people might be more responsive if I'm actually really joyful than if I'm jaded and trying to present these ideas. So I'm seeing that the joy needs to come first. So even I'm just seeing now that going home and saying to the clubhouse, oh, I have these ideas, I was away and you haven't seen me in months and now I have all these ideas of things I want to do, is probably the wrong approach. Just really going back and being grateful to be around these wonderful beings and all the wonderful space that they've given me to get to this point, and just really feeling into that and resonating with that and being joyful with people, and then seeing what happens if something happens where there's invitations to talk about certain things or certain things happen in dialogue, then they happen. Like, I've created that resonance and context for myself. So if there's an opportunity to share at the right time in the right context, then I'll say something. But to actually just do it out of context is not good. So I think important thing is just go back and be joyful. And maybe if I didn't even think of this, I would just go back and be joyful. I wouldn't be talking about it, or maybe I don't need to talk about that in order to remember. But there is this balance of really wanting to do something to help, but then at the same time knowing that I'm not in the position to do so right now, but I am in the position to create a really joyful life in this next year. And this might come across as kind of contrived to be talking to myself about this, but the thing is that my brain doesn't really have this solid grounding on step 1, step 2, step 3, or some kind of method. So just having dialogue with myself about this is helpful. And I actually wrote down how does this translate to home? How does my time away in California translate to home? Because people have been going about their lives in the way that they do. And I was removed from everybody's lives. I removed myself, and then I come back. So how do I translate this in an empowering way that's not... I don't know. Just asking the question is enough, really. I don't really have to answer it. I'm just asking my brain, how do I share or reintegrate in a inspiring or positive way? Because I was thinking I could just say to people, oh yeah, it was fun, I had a good time, it was so nice to be away, I'm glad I'm back. But that's not really that powerful. And it's not about trying to be powerful. It's actually, this experience here has been powerful. So how can I share that in a way that is empowering for people, or really shares the essence of how I feel, which is, it was so amazing to be away and have this space, and very challenging, and I probably won't share all the challenges initially. But I'm just so grateful to be back, and I'm so grateful for all my family and friends and the clubhouse and my community, because I wouldn't have got to this place in California if it weren't for them. So it's just really interesting how it's like, thank you, because of you I was able to go on this trip and do this for myself, and just go back and be joyful and sort of maybe really just enjoy having a clear nervous system for a while, because that hasn't happened for a really long time. So to really put all that energy into doing so much with the clear nervous system might not be enough space and time to just really settle in and be grateful. Or I could think of it like, if I don't put this energy to use right away, then it's actually sort of wasting it or not being helpful. So I really don't know what the right approach is. And I probably relearn it every day, because today I was like, oh, I want to be helpful, and then I tried to help and I'm like, oh, I can't help. And then maybe when I get back I'll be like, wow, there's a lot of ways that I can be helpful in some way, or not even be helpful, but just participate and play a role in something. So we'll see. I'm curious to see how that'll unfold. But I was thinking about just saying how important nature is for me, and just share the important things that I experienced here, and then also share all the important things that I missed, and just be joyful with people. So I'll stop talking because this video is getting long, but I'll probably make another one. I have so much to talk about. It's incredible. One other thing that kind of struck me about this whole medicine card thing was that it's another indication to me about what I've been talking about, how something's created in the brain first, and also how the mind and the brain aren't separate from matter in the external world. So I selected certain cards that were actually very relevant according to my brain, beyond just chance that each card has enough information to really speak to each position in the spread. So it's like the brain knows which card is there almost, or they're just one thing. Like the mind, the brain, and the gesture and the reaching for the material separate thing supposedly is still one thing. It's all consciousness, and how it said matter follows vision. The matter will follow it. The right cards will be there. They have to be, because this whole process of thinking and reaching for objects and moving external objects in space is all this epigesturetic, epimemetic dialogue. It's all one language. Our movements in matter and in consciousness is all one language. But we separate this sort of outer movement from this inner movement of thought, and we think it's separate because usually we're thinking about something that has nothing to do with the moment. So we really separate ourselves. But when we're not doing that, we see that it's one language, it's one communication, it's one dialogue, how we move our body and how our mind moves. And it's not our separate mind, it's the whole mind of the universe, the whole cosmos is one movement. And we can start to really understand that language and understand how the universe communicates with us, because we're an integral part of it, not separate because I'm thinking about 5 years ago. That's how we separate ourselves. So it becomes this really interesting flow. And I feel like when one is in touch with this subtle language, that one has to decondition or decouple from this old way of language, which is using language to separate us from the present moment, then we can actually be aware and integrally participating with the language of the moment as we're part of that. But if we're thinking about 2 years ago, we're not going to see those signs and those clues. And then when we first get in contact with in-map consciousness, we're like, oh, there's signs everywhere. Oh my God, there's clues everywhere. Synchronicity and all this thing. I actually think synchronicity is when it happens like that, so obviously it's just sort of a built-up missing of every moment. So then when we start to get in contact with the moment through the energy of the universe and the map consciousness process, we're like, wow, this is so magical, when really it's just how the universe communicates with us and as us and through us. That if we were in touch with it every moment, it would still be quite mysterious and intriguing and interesting and fascinating, but it wouldn't have that, oh my God, this is the most magical thing ever. Because that's how we feel if we take some kind of drug. So the problem is when we've been numbed out and dulled down by a repetitive ego, as soon as that sort of gets scrambled, then it feels like we are on a drug, because we've basically been on downers in terms of our own voice and thoughts used against us, repeating in our brains, making it deteriorate and dull out for years. So it's like just having a very sensitive nervous system all of a sudden and being really sensitive to the signs. But once one learns that language, one can be aware of it without being so hypersensitized by it. And then it just becomes like this really interesting game. Right now we play this ego game and play by all those rules. And it's not really an interesting game, so then we're looking for something else. We're looking for a different game. And I feel like we're seeking because we're not creating. And we're not creating because we're not seeing the way that we are the present moment and we create it. It's created in our brain, and if our brain is really sensitive and not full of old memes on repeat, we can see what our brain then just created for us to see. And it's always so different. It's not the same thing, and it's subtle. It's not like so obvious. It was so obvious. It becomes so obvious when we first go into map consciousness, and then we think it's just this really obvious thing, but it only feels obvious because it's all of a sudden happening and it never has before. But when one understands that that's what's always happening, and one can notice it any time, it doesn't take time to find it. And we're looking for something in particular, and since we're seeking and seeking and seeking and think it's something away from the moment, that moves us away from the moment, and then we miss these subtleties of the moment. So really we're seeing the subtleties of each moment, which we don't really know what that is. It's an unknown energy that always presents itself differently. So if we think we know what we're looking for, we're definitely going to miss it. So it just becomes more and more subtle and fascinating. And I talk about it now, even like, oh wow, that was really interesting, but it's sort of like getting used to it. I think synchronicity, this really obvious manifestation of things moving in harmony, becomes synchronizing. It's just sort of always synchronous and always synchronized and always synergetic, and not like, boom, that was obvious, and boom, that was obvious, and boom, that was obvious. Like, whoa, what's happening in life? Oh my gosh, like, how is it so magical all of a sudden? Well, it's always been that way, but we're looking for something else. And so the universe sometimes comes in and makes it really obvious for us, but then it sort of blows our minds so much that we can't participate in sort of the functional domain of life because we're so enraptured by this magic. And the magic is there, and it's always there. But then when one sees that it's always there, it's not really that magical, yet still very beautiful. It's elegant. It's like this elegant design of some kind that we can unfold by our own discovery and creation, and actually discover how we're really creating our lives. It's nice to say thoughts create things, or thoughts attract stuff, or whatever. It's not really that. That is just another distraction, really. Because anything we choose to think to direct our attention is still going to direct it away from the richness of the moment that would surprise us with infinite wonders instead of the one thing that we're trying to focus on. And maybe if we focus, we might find that one thing that we want to focus on, but it's not what the universe wants. The universe wants us to be in touch with the moment, not focused on something very meaningless that we've been tricked into feeling like it's meaningful. So anyways, blah, blah, blah. So we're seeking because we're not creating what we're looking for. We have to create within ourselves to unfold as manifest. And really what we need to create is our own understanding. So then that understanding can arise in the manifest. Because if matter follows vision, understanding is part of vision. It's actually a process of seeing something for oneself. It's one's own discovery. And then when one has discovered it within oneself, it can be presented to the nervous system in the manifest. So that's how the vision arises first, the understanding, the insight, the discovery, and then the matter follows. So that vision, that understanding actually changes the algorithm in our nervous system to be able to receive that exact whatever that we just understood. And that's the confirmation, in a way, that the understanding was correct. But then even whatever that understanding was needs to be forgot about immediately, because there's an infinity of dynamics and processes to understand, and one can get stuck on something and then miss what's next. So yeah, what's really most important is one's own understanding, and it must happen in our own brain first. And by seeking, we only get better at seeking, which is moving us away from the moment. Seeking to me seems in opposition to understanding. There's no need to seek anything if one is just in touch with the moment. One will see something and understand it. And I really feel like so-called mental illness is just having all of those understandings that aren't even understandings at all. They're just programs and conditionings sort of deleted and suspended from our brain, which basically renders us non-functional, but there's an intelligence there in that we can possibly start to understand things for ourselves again from scratch and go step by step. And it's difficult to do that because we don't have the time and space to move through our own understanding, and are often given the understanding that all these diagnoses and labels come with. And that blocks understanding for oneself. But one can still do it at the same time. It's totally possible. It's possible to have one understanding that is sort of in the functional domain and might help a person stay functional while moving into understanding and through one's own understanding. And I actually feel like when I've had a crisis of some kind, all those so-called relapses, it was because I moved in the wrong direction of understanding. I would often say the crisis would happen when I'm thriving, but really I was thriving in the wrong understanding. I was thriving in the mental health context. Like that last crisis before hospitalization in April 2016, I was doing stand-up comedy for mental illness. And then, lo and behold, I landed in the psych ward because the universe is sort of telling me, you're playing in the wrong understanding. So even if you're at the top of that understanding in terms of being able to laugh at it and make fun of it and joke and things, it's still not the correct understanding. So it's sort of moving in that context to stay loyal to that context and stay loyal to all of that has supported me, but I still always hit the ceiling of possibilities. Because to be at the top of that trajectory is still something that completely weakens my nervous system. So I'm going to start a note. Things to say when I get back. Something about how I had a lot of time to think about my life and what I might want to do moving forward. So that might be something that invites someone to ask me about something like that without saying, I came back to start this, and this. So, and I could also anticipate questions people might ask me like, are you going to go back to work? What are you going to do? Blah, 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 for money, yada, yada. So I could just say what's really important to me right now is reintegrating, because I've spent a lot of time in quiet and nature, and now I'm coming back to a completely different environment, which could be somewhat of a shock. So my main focus right now is to minimize shocks to my nervous system and create joy in my home environment and really move from that space of joy. One thing that concerns me is that I read in Dr. David Hawkins' work that sometimes we're limited by the level of the collective consciousness of the area. And I know in California that the level of consciousness might be slightly higher, so there might be a step down in consciousness to the surrounding environment. And that's not necessarily true, because I have tons of great people in my life back home. So it's not necessarily true. I'm not trying to say, this place is so enlightened and back home isn't. And really, It's about, can I keep the strength of my nervous system no matter where I am? And also at the same time minimize the things that I know would weaken my nervous system, like working in mental health. So it's about lifestyle design based on what I know about my nervous system. And there's so many people that I miss so much that without them, my level of consciousness or whatever would have never gotten to the place that it was ever at to be able to go to California in the first place. So I'm not trying to say one is good or the other is bad. I'm just saying that 6 years ago when I was in California, when I went back home, it was quite the shock, and it's something that put my nervous system into shock and went into map consciousness, and everything felt new because I was away for a while, and then I really was in this extremely high state of consciousness because I sort of did bring that high state of consciousness back with me, but then it bottomed out eventually. So I'm wondering about minimizing the possibility of that. It's not a 1 + 1 = 2 thing. It's very multidimensional. I don't even understand it. I'm going to maybe learn a lot about this going back because I've never left for a long period of time and then gone back. It might be a complete disaster. It might be completely fine and I might not really notice anything. Or I might just notice a lot of things that I didn't notice would bother me before, but now being away and then being back, I'll have the context to actually learn more about what I can design into my life and what I could remove. So maybe I'll just have to go seek out nature more intentionally, for example. Whereas here, it's just everywhere. So I don't have to intentionally set up my day to be in nature. So there's just really practical things and then energetic things and functional things. There's a lot of different dimensions, and just getting those needs met and knowing that my nervous system has some very unique needs, especially since I've been in dialogue with it for so long. I kind of have a sense of that. So yeah, just not getting overwhelmed. And I know in speaking this way, it sounds like, oh, this place is so enlightened and back home is just like this pile of crap. It's not that way at all. It's probably going to be a lot easier than I think. It's just a matter of actually fearing what happened 6 years ago, being in California and then going home, and basically having that as my indoctrination into the mental health system. So a lot of this, talking to myself about this particular thing, is just really fear-based. And also fearing being off meds and then going back home and not having the right dialogues about it and maybe saying something to somebody that I shouldn't. And I just really have to be strong and hopefully joyful. And it's sort of contradictory for me to talk about fearing those things when I'm saying whatever happens is sort of created in the nervous system first and then it's manifested. So what understanding do I need in order to go home with an understanding that will unfold in helpful ways, in ways that I would self-direct for myself, in terms of being healthy and being happy? And one thing that might bother me is seeing some of my friends struggling. That might be difficult because here I am doing well, and then to watch them struggle makes me feel like I'm struggling because I don't feel separate. So I'll have to remember how one person told me that I can't lose my own health in perceiving the suffering of others, because if I do, then I can't do anything to help somebody. So I wonder what I can do. Maybe just not do anything, just listen. Not feel like I can do anything, but just really be with that person. Yeah, I really don't know. I just hope that, I don't know. But I feel like I need to be off meds for a while before I share that with people, because it needs to really be integrated. So I'll be home, and then maybe when I'm home for several months, then it might be time to share that. But I do need to be careful with premature sharing, because I do consider this as like research, and sharing the results too soon, even though people might watch this at some point and say, well, why didn't you share right away? That would have changed the way it would have unfolded, because people would have been saying stuff like, you should do this, or have you tried that, or yeah, blah, 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 when I really need to be integrated in that before I share it, I feel. So I'll probably do another video, because I want to talk more about that superhuman stuff, and I wrote some other stuff today too. So it's really piling up. So I wonder when I go home if I'll have space to just keep talking to myself, and the rest of the time just have a joyful life. And then tomorrow I'll probably be saying, oh, the rest of the time I'm creating a pure respite. I don't know. It might not be quite time for that yet. So I'm realizing that I need to create the joy in my brain first, and then people who share all the same consciousness will just naturally pick up on that, and I'll have the right people in my life. But I do want to talk more about this Superhuman podcast from Ken Wilber and finish that off, and then I'll be done for the day. And then there's the business extrapolations that I'll probably save for later, because I feel like I need to shift the focus to joy and maybe be in the business of just joy. And that's why I kind of want to study with Patch Adams or something. Just really go deep into this joy domain. I was really joyful for quite a period of time when I was taking medications, and in that joy was really the protection. And as soon as I lost that joy by working in peer support and not being so connected to my community, things didn't go well, because basically the joy wasn't in my nervous system, so joyful things did not happen. So maybe one day there's a way to be joyful and work in mental health, but I don't know if that is the case right now. And if it's not in my nervous system, I'm going to experience whatever is resonating through my nervous system. So I need to create that. So yeah, maybe just be in the business of creating joy in my nervous system. And I feel like from that higher state of consciousness, then the things that I envision creating will unfold in more magical ways that are requiring less effort than if at a lower state of consciousness. But then, that being said, if one is too joyful, one can be perceived as being manic. And I've talked about it's not safe to be that joyful in this life. And especially already having a label, I could easily be misinterpreted. So joy is kind of dangerous too. I really don't know what to do. I'm just talking to myself. That's all I can do, really. So on to the Ken Wilber stuff. He has this thing he talks about, aqua, which is all quadrants, all lines. And I won't go into his theory, because he has pages and books full of great information. So Ken Wilber, The Spectrum of Consciousness is one book. There's a ton of stuff, but he says quadrants, lines, states, and types come online. You are actually creating the new human being. And that's really interesting, because basically he's saying we're creating the new human being. New humanity will have nothing to do with the old. And this resonates with me, because when I first went into map consciousness, it had nothing to do with my old mode of operating whatsoever. So I'm sharing this because I feel like what he's talking about is very similar to map consciousness, but people who go into map consciousness just in an instant have a hard time integrating. So it's different than maybe moving towards an integral level of consciousness consciously, step by step. We're just sort of pushed into it by the universe, which gives a blueprint which can be helpful to unfold, but we don't really have a framework of understanding to be able to do that. We're just locked in a chemical prison. And he was using we language, like we have no idea what this would look like, as in he was saying that he doesn't even know what this new humanity is going to look like, but he's really indicating that we have to create it. He says, we have to make it up as we go. Because we're having to make it up as we go, so we don't even know what it will look like. He said, we need people in this superhuman condition. Once you find it, it will start to develop. And for me, map consciousness finds us a lot of the time, and it starts to develop. So that's why having an understanding of this could be helpful, or even moving in this kind of understanding to create a map of map consciousness before one ever experiences map consciousness. It's like drawing the map step by step instead of waiting for the universe to throw you in that territory. It's like getting to draw the map with the lights on during daytime versus being thrown in the same territory in the dark and being expected to draw the map. So I feel when map consciousness comes upon us, really we've stumbled upon superhumanity. I even wrote a note to myself to listen to this podcast every day because I thought it was so good. And I feel like my self-dialogue is my superhumanity in a way, or it's creating my own theory of my own superhumanity. And if we create a path, there is no path. It means we're actually creating the path as we go. And he talked about levels of altitude and asked, what is the ingredient of altitude? And it could be the degree of consciousness and complexity. And I actually made a note related to Dr. Daniel Siegel's context and how he talks about how differentiation and linkage is important. And I felt like this is not related to the Ken Wilber thing, and I'll probably talk about it later because I won't be checking it off my list of notes, but it just sort of relates to this complexity. I feel like in map consciousness, we start to be able to link very well. We can link this, we make new insights and associations, and we can see how things interrelate, but we're not able to differentiate. So really, Dr. Daniel Siegel says differentiate, then link. But we're linking and linking and linking without differentiating. So all of a sudden everything feels like us, and we're not able to discern inside from outside and me from them. It just feels like all one movement. And then that could be true on some level, actually. But the thing is that it makes it hard to function when we don't really know these distinctions. So there could be a different differentiating and linking process than the one that maybe he describes, one that's actually more actual. It's getting a little bit dark, so it's time to wrap this up soon, but I was just talking about levels of altitude mentioned by Ken Wilber, and that made me think of how mania, in a way, is a level of altitude. It gets us in touch with an extreme level of altitude that we have access to but have never touched upon before. In a way, that's what harvest your mania is. And I even thought of better terminology, which is really harvest your experience, or harvest your blueprint, or harvest your download, or harvest your altered states, or whatever. But really, harvest your altitude or harvest your mania shows us what lines we need to develop, what lines of intelligence, whether it's our social intelligence or our moral intelligence, or maybe even just this map consciousness intelligence overall, which is actually multidimensional intelligence. And there's probably lines of intelligence that we don't even know about. And maybe one of the lines of intelligence is this creative intelligence, or this intelligence of dialogue with oneself or unfolding one's own understanding in order to prime the nervous system to then be able to receive those in the form of people, things, and ideas in reality. So can we have a creational attitude, and that can be our altitude. So really we get a taste of our altitude in so-called mania or map consciousness, but then we need to develop them. So it's really a gift, and we can really look at that and see what areas did we need to develop, what areas did we fail at. And it could be as simple as just not having a couple of lines of intelligence developed. So we have an overdeveloped intellect and an overdeveloped ego, but our emotional intelligence and our social intelligence is sort of underdeveloped, and a lot of it is sort of overcompensated for by our intellect and ego structures, and we relate in that way. So those other lines are quite underdeveloped. So when we lose our ego structure, that is sort of the mediator of our intellect, we're sort of bobbling around without that intelligence, but really it's trying to bring intelligences into balance. So through my process after map consciousness and going through the mental health system, I think I actually developed my moral and social intelligence quite a bit more than it was before. And maybe that's kind of what the process does in a way, is to learn that, but it's hard to learn that through the mental health system sometimes. But I managed to do that to some extent. And then hopefully by having the medications to sort of slow the process down so that I can learn those things, now being off the medication, it's still in my nervous system, all those lines of intelligence I was able to develop. So then when I'm off the meds, those can still operate. So there's maybe a nutritional line of development. I wonder if there's sort of like a financial business sharing line of development that I need to develop. And he mentioned how slavery disappeared from 1770 to 1870. And I really want to abolish psychological slavery in, say, the next 20 years. Slavery to the mental health system, or even people who don't go through that, they're sort of slaves to their ego. And in a way, we've become slaves to the science that freed us from those mythic levels that Ken Wilber talks about. I feel like superhumans have magic and science, and it's integrated. Maybe we understand more the magic of our own nervous system. And really those lines of development are in our nervous system. And I think one of the lines of development is sort of having a sensitive nervous system that when seeing something that makes the nervous system go weak, it goes weak because there's no rational structure as much to rationalize these things away. It's really felt in the mirror neurons, and empathetically it's really felt in the body. And if one would feel these things all the time, one would move away from that and not participate in allowing that to continue, at least in one's own world. And as that's eliminated from people's worlds, it's eliminated from the world. So maybe it's a matter of just moving towards that which makes the nervous system strong. And that's why I fear a little bit trying to do anything in the mental health system, because seeing what's happening really makes my nervous system weak. And I'm starting to feel like the strength of one's nervous system is of primary importance. So we shouldn't necessarily use the aspects of science to enslave us from developing further. And really we are scientists by understanding how a nervous system goes strong and goes weak. And Dr. David Hawkins really did a ton of work around this and has many great books. But the thing is that one can utilize that understanding just to be aware of it in one's life. What makes one's nervous system go weak and what makes it go strong, whether it's people, places, ideas, things like the news, etc. And everyone's view is real when we're each creating our view. And can we share our views to co-create views and not believe? And maybe map consciousness actually crushes certain lines of development that are overdeveloped, or that we don't even really need so much anymore, if we're able to bring online some of these other lines of development. So, for example, if one is able to bring on this dialogical line of development, or insights, having insights just by looking at something, which is really dialogical, then maybe we don't really need so much intellect. So it could be possible that the intellect sort of has to scramble and fail somewhat in order for the dialogical aspect to come online. And when it does and it's fully integrated, we don't really need so much that intellectual thing, because the intellect might actually be a small part of insight and dialogue. And there's a line of development that is intelligence beyond the ego. So the ego sort of needs to crumble in order for that to come online. And then recovery works so hard to get people's egos back intact. But if we're able to create this new line of development, these new lines of development that Ken Wilber says we don't even know what that's going to look like, well, we have to give it time to flower and for our brains to understand and have discoveries if we're going to allow it to develop. Otherwise, we just try and squash it back into the ego. And that's why I don't really agree with Dr. Daniel Siegel when he says, oh, people who have mental illnesses have trouble with this and that, and these structures aren't integrating. I think they're disintegrating for a reason. And there are other faculties that could come online that would actually render those other structures, just like vestigial structures in the brain, no longer needed. Because again, we're always assuming that we know what human beings are supposed to look like and operate as, and we really don't. If we think that we know, look at what's created in the world as a result of this operating system that most of us have. And that paints the picture, because the world is a combination of what is happening and how everyone is operating. So I feel like in map consciousness, so many lines of development atrophy to give us a chance to really explore and understand and develop ourselves from scratch. And most of us would not want to do that. And perhaps it wouldn't be so scary if there was a safe framework and a safe territory to explore in that way. So maybe there are quantum trajectories that we can experience. Maybe one day we won't really even have lines of development. We'll just be so in touch with the moment, and we can just be moved so fluidly by the moment, as the moment, that we'll never even have time to stop and think, oh, am I developing? We'll just be in such flow. Who's going to develop? Where's this accumulation happening of development, or even some kind of subjectivity to come in and reflect on how one has improved in time? And I feel that can only happen when more of us are actually fluid, because some of the improvements, the so-called improvements that we might be measuring ourselves by, are in reference to what society looks like or what most people operate by, or also how we used to be. But when people just aren't really that way, we might not really think in terms of those kind of measures. I'm not sure. There's a difference between practice and just being so clear and observant and pliable to the moment, as Krishnamurti might say. So really it's just a prior stage that I was medicated, and now I've moved beyond that, at least for now. We'll see how long that lasts. Hopefully indefinitely. And he said something about make that force work in you and for you. And I feel like that's exactly what I'm doing with self-dialogue. It makes that force work in me and for me. And it's something that I can do in myself, with myself, for myself, and it's not dependent on much else. And he said, activate your full spectrum potential. I think map consciousness gives us a good hint of this. And he says we can't know how to increase our skills if we don't know what they are. But I think we who go into map consciousness have a little bit of an advantage, because we actually do know what some of our skills are. So if we go back and harvest our map consciousness, we can actually think about the skills and the intelligences that we had a hint of that were interesting and move towards developing them stepwise. And he talked about intelligences we have that we aren't using. And I think that's what map consciousness shows us. It shows us that we have a lot of intelligences that we aren't using. And then they come online and we try to use them. And maybe that's part of the problem or the trouble, is that that first state of map consciousness is really just to show us some of our intelligences, but not necessarily for us to try to use them, because we actually don't know how to use them. That's something that we can do stepwise when the state ends. And maybe it will end more gracefully if we don't try to use those powers or those intelligences. Because the trouble is, the ego is still really mixed in there, and it can use it for its own devices, and that's probably what causes a lot of the crash. And I feel like I need to awaken these, and maybe some of my gifts and talents are these ideas and seeing. And maybe it's a downfall to actually attempt to try to get other people to see it. Maybe just keep seeing it and going with it. Or maybe I do need others to see it. I think what my downfall is, and the crash really is just working in a framework that is against my nervous system. And that's an area that sabotages it. Because it really hurts my nervous system to see what's happening to people, especially when in my heart I have such a different framework that would unfold something differently. But first I need to unfold it for myself. And he said states plug us into the original creative force, profound experiences of meaning and purpose. And that's exactly what map consciousness does. It is that original creative force, and we become very, very creative. So really, it's not that, oh, people with bipolar are creative. It's the original creative force that we all have. And I missed number 3. And all of this was on a link, superhumans.net/book. And number 4 was activating the innate capacities in your innate typology. So this can kind of be a fun game to really understand our gifts and our capacities and our lines of development and things. Instead of seeking for something to fix us, actually unfolding ourselves and creating ourselves. And I've always said, even in my talks to people when I was sharing my story, that I think of recovery as rediscovery and recreation of oneself. And I still do. I think of it more as rediscovery and recreation of oneself, not recovery. Because recovery implies getting something back or getting back to some level of functionality, when I feel that we can be completely different. There's nothing to recover. Why recover something that wasn't working when what might flower in its place if we move towards understanding and are curious and wonder might be something completely different. Like, I don't even know what that is. And Ken Wilber talks about the I space, the it space, the we space, which is something about, the we space is something about the interior of the collective. And I feel like this is what I work on a little bit in self-dialogue, because this is something that is sort of collective in a way, or it could change the interior of people who have had some of these experiences. But right now it's just in my I space, but it does move out to the we space because I do talk to people, and things that I talk about do come up. And I'm actually wondering if when I go home I'll want to share things, but I've been more open to sharing some context I've created here in a different environment. So if I go home in a new environment, but I'm sharing in exactly the same way with new people, but sort of just going about the way I was always sharing here, it could create some dissonance. So I have to be careful about that. I have to be gentle with the context that I share when I go home, because I'm in a new environment with new people that I already know. But if I'm acting in different ways or new ways, it could be interesting. So I wonder if there's a way to bring that up in things to say when I go home. Something about, I feel like I've really changed since I've gone. I participated in a lot of dialogues and I've learned to communicate in new ways. And Ken Wilber talks about how all these dimensions are real and they change the way the world looks. And all of these dimensions have something to say. The I space, the it space, the we space, the it space. And I feel like all consciousness has something to say, not just these dimensions. But so to be unaware of the dimensions would have us be pushed around by them. So I need to be aware of the interiors of others who have this sort of pathologizing perspective. So I feel like we can understand, play, and master. So he's saying that we need to have all those perspectives, and if we don't, we either have those perspectives or they have you. And that these perspectives are psychoactive. And that once we understand a few basics, it can be really helpful. I really feel there's more than 4 categories. I feel like there's infinite categories and infinite richness, and we can really speak and have the perspective of anything. And I guess they probably all fall within these 4 categories, but to just really think, oh, this goes into this category and this goes into that category, we might miss some richness there. And Ken Wilber talks about subtle bodies and causal bodies, and I feel like I understand more the causal body in a way. I didn't really know what that was about, and I feel like self-dialogue actually operates on the subtle bodies and the causal bodies. Like right now I'm creating through self-dialogue, and I've talked myself into considering superhumanity, which is sort of a subtle and causal thing. I think it's pretty hard to consider one's superhumanity when one's on medications, because one's just going to have that framework of pathology. And I actually remember feeling hyper-moral in my first experience of so-called mania, and it was like all the intellectual reasoning away of things got disengaged, and I really sensed a morality that was different than the one that we get programmed with. And that was a lot for today, but sometimes I feel like talking to myself is the only thing I can do. Maybe I don't know how to communicate with other people so much anymore. And tonight is the first night that I won't take any Benadryl whatsoever, and I will likely fall asleep without a problem. I have had week-long PMS from hell, and I still haven't got my period, so it's good to know, because when I get home it'll be sort of the same time a month, and I'll really need to watch out, because I don't want to have that mixed in. It will be mixed in, but I'll just have to be extra careful